I'm a little under the weather, sorry if my voice is weird. I have finished the Silent Hill 2 remake on the hard difficulty for both combat and puzzles. There's stuff about it that I'm happy with, and stuff that I'm not. I'd like to get right to it, but I have covered this game several times over the 2 years since it was officially revealed, so certain things have to be addressed before talking about my playthrough. I'm ecstatic to be here admitting that several of my predictions were wrong. I was concerned they would alter the endings, they would shy away from Eddie's obesity, that sensitive themes like Angela's abuse would be mishandled. I thought they might stuff the game with modern padding like side quests. I thought they might erase the complex morality involved in the hard situation of caring for a dying family member. I was wrong about all that, and that's great. I invite you to go to those old videos and laugh at me for being wrong. I'm happy to be wrong. I didn't want to be right on those predictions. But I don't think it was wrong for us to have been deeply concerned, given that Bloober Team's track record was very spotty, and Konami has horribly mishandled the Silent Hill property for 2 decades. Our concerns were absolutely justified. Why would you trust them? It's been a rocky road, with the poorly received 2022 announcement trailer and the combat trailer, but I have never cheered for this game's failure. I am far happier with the idea of a great Silent Hill 2 remake than I am with a bad one that I can get rage clicks on or whatever. Seeing this game end up as a disaster would give me no pleasure. So I can't cleanly separate this review into the positives and negatives. I'm just gonna go by categories instead, which will contain both. And I'm warning you, this review is gonna get pretty heated. I'm gonna focus on things that many people will probably not care about, or not be bothered by unless their attention is drawn to it. So please, play the game first before I shape your feelings on it. This video will spoil all kinds of story points and gameplay moments, so go forth at your own risk. As a retelling of a classic story, Silent Hill 2 Remake does an alright job. The central story of James's emotional journey is intact. Eddie is a more compelling character this time around, very intimidating and memorable, and Angela gets a lot more screen time here, fleshing her out a bit better, even if I'm not a big fan of this version of her. The performances are mixed. James, unfortunately, is really boring for the first 2/3, though much later in the game, James does come into his own. He has some great moments once he's been effectively traumatized. I love the way he reacts to Maria in the labyrinth scene. He just doesn't even know what to think about all this anymore.
I'll be waiting.
I'll find some way to... I'll come back, I promise.
I really like James's later interactions with Laura, and Laura herself is okay, I guess. Really, deep character analysis is something that would take a long time to put together after multiple playthroughs. That's not something I can do here. The one character I can say for certain doesn't work is Maria. Just as I suspected from the story trailer a few months ago, she is awful. Very weak voice performance, and the only one to blame for that is the director of the game. How is it that a pre-rendered cutscene from a PS2 game gives a far more convincing and emotional performance than the remake from 23 years later?
Anyway, I'm glad you're alive.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? You don't sound very happy to see me. I was almost killed back there. Why didn't you try to save me? All you care about is that dead wife of yours. I've never been so scared in my whole life. Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? I was almost killed back there. I have never been so scared in my whole life.
Maria sounds like she's reading lines from a script instead of actually talking to you. You can hear that, right?
Did something happen to you? After we got separated in that long hallway? Are you confusing me with someone else?
Did something happen to you? After we got separated in that long hallway? Are you confusing me with someone else?
Are you confusing me with someone else?
And man, if you can't actually animate the woman to be able to talk to you as you're moving around, just do what the original did and make her only talk during cutscenes. Cause as it is now, she's this total weirdo that can't make eye contact with me, strangely shifting around as I move. This does not help me connect to her character. Maria is so bad that no matter how faithful the retelling of this narrative is, it falls flat because the single most important person outside of James himself has been screwed up. Her flirtatiousness has been severely downplayed, her sexiness is essentially non-existent, and it's not just the midriff that's missing. We knew from the reveal of her that her sexual side would be toned down, even though it's crucial to her character.
And of course Maria's ambiguity. Icy cold like death.
I'm not your Mary.
And suddenly sensual.
So, you're Maria?
I am. If you want me to be.
But little did we know that all the sexually evocative elements of Silent Hill 2 would be removed. Remember when Pyramid Head was seen holding a lying figure's head to his crotch before the boss fight? That's gone. Remember those disgusting orifices in Angela's nightmare with those really disturbing thrusting organs representing her abuse? Well, the organs are gone now. They're just holes in the walls. There was symbolism here. It's gone now. Silent Hill 2, the gold standard for how to integrate haunting images of sexuality into a horror game without it feeling exploitative and tasteless, has been censored to the point of having no sexuality at all. A lifeless Maria that taunts players by referencing her original outfit that this game wouldn't dare to use, an ending execution scene stripped of all its intensity, and the removal of dark sexual imagery. What's the point? As the director of the original game said,
everybody is thinking and concerning about, sex and death every day. And if we want to scare or shake or touch the users or spectators, then we have to think about sex and death deeply. Somebody died or monsters died. We try to mix erotic essence. This is kind of a visual and, core concept.
Well, now all we have is death. Good job, Bloober Team, at missing the point. That's all I have to say on the story and characters right now. Let's get to the gameplay. I boot up the game on PC, and it tells me this is a better experience with a controller. I'm gonna take that suggestion and shove it up my own ass, thank you very much, because I'm not playing a game with precision aiming on a controller, no. Turn off the completely unnecessary low health warning that floods the screen red. James shows damage on his person and moves slower when hurt, and that's all you need. Go ahead and turn the interactive prompts off if you want a genuine, unpatronizing experience. It was so much more rewarding to be exploring these spaces myself using only James's head turns as a clue, instead of following the stupid white circles telling me everything I can click on. I felt a lot better when I found something because I found it. The game didn't just blatantly tell me where it was with an icon, but that's what happens when you strip a game of its original camera direction. I also turned off tutorial prompts after about an hour or so. Once the initial mechanics had been introduced, I didn't want the game telling me anymore. Turn on DLSS to get these ugly textures to stop appearing on gated fences, and you're ready to go. But can someone tell me what's going on with this weird black shadow ghosting effect every time you turn while you're against the fog? I can't find any setting that makes it go away. It's even in the trailers. For the first 4 hours, I was saying, wow, they actually pulled it off. It was really impressive. Whereas the original only had a light amount of city exploration leading up to the apartments, the remake opens things up, letting you enter several stores, closed buildings from the original like the flower shop, making this Silent Hill 2 a game where the town feels a lot more like a central part of the experience and not just a few streets you run down to get to the next big map. I greatly appreciate that change. They also have a wonderful new way to introduce James's destination of Rosewater Park. In the original, he just remembers that he and Mary spent a day in the park, so maybe she's waiting for him there. In the remake, you don't have a destination for a while. After a series of locations, you end up at Bar Neely's and find a jukebox that needs a record. Further exploration of the town leads you to finding 2 record halves that can be combined into a single record, which plays a song that triggers a memory in his mind. He remembers that day at the park. Maybe that's where she is. and this is like a couple hours into the game. It's a really elegant and natural way to lead James on his way. It sparks the journey to the apartments, and these returning memories of Mary are accompanied by raging winds pushing against you as you make your way forward. The streets become very dangerous and loud, fighting against the weather until you reach what feels like safety, since the stark contrast of the apartments almost feels soothing due to how quiet they are, but we know there will be no peace here. Several aspects like this have been expanded on. The music box puzzle in the hotel now has different puzzles connected to each music box before you find them. The rotating head in the labyrinth is now a central part of the map, returned to multiple times. And my favorite example is the clock in the apartments. Originally, you just unlocked it, pushed it out of the way, and you moved on. Now, you're exploring the apartments to find different clock hands, setting the time separately to unlock 3 different doors. These previously small puzzles have become central focus points of each map that take a lot more time to get past. In isolation, I like this idea a lot, but it's also where the problems of Silent Hill 2 Remake start to rear their ugly heads. So the opening street section and the first parts of the apartments are, in my opinion, stellar. I was ready to call this a Game of the Year contender. But the expansion of the maps and puzzles, something I just got done praising, ultimately goes way too far. The apartments, the prison, and especially the hospital have seen total redesigns. These are all new locations as far as I'm concerned, so if you're expecting your familiarity with the original game to give you any kind of advantage, you are sorely mistaken. That's not in itself a criticism, it's just a fact. But due to the vast expansion of these maps and the unintuitive structure, I found it hard to simply visualize where I was. Look at the original Brookhaven map. These 3 floors were all laid out in this easy to understand and iconic corridor format, so you had a sense of where you were going without pulling out the map every 10 seconds. Now the hospital is so complex, so full of twists and turns and dead ends and shortcuts and backtracking paths that it becomes a headache to navigate. It's straight up over-designed and drawn out to such a degree that it becomes exhausting. And that's not a feeling I enjoy in a survival horror game. I love figuring out a map and planning my routes and backtracking for puzzles, all that stuff, but after a while, I'm ready to move on. Silent Hill 2 Remake just won't let me. They've stretched the experience to an unbearable length because people today will complain about paying full price for a game that doesn't take 20 hours to finish. There's too much padding in the addition of level interactivity as well. Having to break through a wall is cute at first. I thought it was a good way to set up having to escape the fall in the historical center, but it loses its charm after the 20th time you do it. And if you're gonna make environmental puzzles, you gotta do more than just putting in a bunch of boxes you can move around to climb up, or 15 bookshelves you can push out of the way. It's like they looked at the original game and said, oh hey, you pushed a shelf a couple times, why don't we do it a whole bunch more? I went from absolutely loving my experience in the streets and the apartments to thinking, Jesus, am I ever gonna get out of here and meet Maria? This just won't end. And the sad part is, the overly long levels made me underappreciate all the stuff they actually get right, in their aesthetic, in the smart ways of connecting you to past areas, and in their puzzles. Because not only are the maps 3 times the size as the originals, we also have 3 times the puzzles. I love puzzles, okay, but you can overdo this sort of thing. The original games smartly placed their puzzles at appropriate moments without interrupting the pacing. But the remake eventually had me rolling my eyes. God, another puzzle? I mean, we even have rooms with a central puzzle that unlocks another puzzle in the same room, which unlocks another puzzle on the other side of the room. It's too much, man, it's too much. And that makes the hard puzzle difficulty a tedious experience, because there's a big difference between a brain-bending puzzle here and there, and one happening all the time. And it certainly doesn't help when the puzzles are missing crucial information or flat out lying to you. The classic coin puzzle returns, this time requiring you to solve 3 riddles instead of 1, of course. And the first one makes no sense. The riddle says that no one is left in the shade, and I'm assuming that means something since we have a sun and a tree in the image, and we're also referencing the sun's sheen. We have to be going based on what we see here. Now, let me ask you, dear viewer, dear Silent Hill enthusiast and puzzle lover, if you were standing inside this scenario and the sun was to your far right like this, its light directing this way onto a tree that has only leafless branches on its right side, would you not expect the final two spaces to be the ones in the shade? That would make sense, right? According to the angle? Well, no, the shade is actually in these two spaces. The center one clearly in a spot where sunlight would be entering. Why is this final spot not in the shade? Am I supposed to consider moonlight something that wouldn't result in shade? Well, who talks about shade in the context of night anyway? Oh, it's midnight out, let's go find some shade. Ridiculous. Even if the moonlight means this final space is not in the shade, the trajectory of its light would also mean that the next space is not in the shade. But that's one of the correct choices. I do not appreciate being lied to in puzzles, and this shit drives me insane. Tricky wording I can deal with. Real-world knowledge required to solve a puzzle, dangerous, but it can be clever and rewarding. But don't tell me the sky is blue and then punish me for not knowing the sky is actually red. Bloober, you need a QA guy there to tell you this stuff doesn't make sense. I am available. I charge $10,000 an hour. Geez, I'm really sounding irritated, aren't I? Well, after the duration of these maps had worn down my patience, I finally got out of the obnoxiously long hospital on day 2. I'd become so numb to the entire experience that I just wanted it to be over. Honestly, I wanted to just stop. I took a day off and came back with a cooler head. And when I finally got to the prison, I said, oh no. I started thinking about the prison in the original game, and how it's a fairly brief and compelling section that acts more as a connection to the labyrinth instead of being its own massive area to be explored. They're gonna make it last forever, aren't they? Well, of course, now it's a giant 3-floor sprawling map with 4 locked doors tied to a central puzzle that requires 5 puzzle pieces to use to open each door one at a time, leading to 4 unique sections of the map to explore. Really, I think the only map I can say I was happy with in the end was the hotel, because it's the one that actually feels like the original. Just a remix of the classic layout, much like RE2 Remake's new version of the police station. It hasn't seen a total overhaul, and it generally preserves that original map's flow, which was nice, if only they'd shown the same kind of restraint in the other maps. The pacing issues are also not helped by the fact that James moves agonizingly slow. Okay, credit where credit is due, they removed the horrible stamina system from the original. But your overall movement speed has been severely nerfed, and when you combine the slower movement speed with the expanded maps, you end up with an experience that becomes quite painful at times. Look at how fast James could reach the tunnel from his car in the original. Look how long it takes to run across the hospital. On one end, I can see the benefit to the slow movement, because it makes enemies harder to deal with and harder to avoid. But my god, does it make the levels last forever too. This game needed to be a lot shorter if they're gonna make you so slow. But let's talk about the enemies, the combat, the resource management, all that fun stuff. As a survival horror game, Silent Hill 2 Remake checks all the boxes. Strict resource management, with exploration rewarding you with reserves. Thoughtful map exploration with interconnectivity, challenging puzzles. It's a noble effort and a worthy entry for the genre. The foundation of its design is solid. It's the execution that's lacking. I do like the additions to the enemy AI, different attacks to deal with, movement patterns, mannequins will dodge your shots and run away to hide and attack you later. It's cool. Sadly, actually fighting them doesn't deliver an experience that holds up over time. The original Silent Hill games had very simple and mostly easy combat encounters. You could stun lock a lot of enemies, cheese them, outrun them, but you know what? Silent Hill was never about combat. That's not what you play it for. The combat and the resource management were always the weakest parts of the Silent Hill games. It was secondary to the exploration, atmosphere, horrific imagery, puzzles, sound design, and story. I'm not saying I don't wish it were better, but dare I say the simplistic combat of those old games provides a superior overall experience compared to what the remake provides. Because now, instead of an appropriately measured campaign lasting 8 to 10 hours, with combat that you just kinda go through and forget about, now we have a 16 to 20 hour campaign with combat that demands a lot more attention, takes much longer to finish, and happens constantly, but isn't deep enough to remain interesting past the halfway point, if even that. It becomes tedious to the point of total boredom. I'm really sick of dodging and countering, waiting to read if the nurse is going to do her fast attack, her other fast attack, or her slow lunge that punishes you for dodging too early. It's the same thing over and over. Enemies are also incredibly dangerous with their ability to completely tank melee strikes with their own attacks. If they're winding up an attack, it feels entirely random if you can interrupt it or not with a strike of your own. It would be nice if you had some kind of counterplay to this, like a charged melee maybe? Something that was guaranteed to stop an incoming enemy attack, but it has a longer windup so you can take the risk. Even the original had different intensity to the melee attacks. But all you can do here is dodge out of the way, pump a few bullets, do some strikes, dodge again. And when I say this game doesn't have enough deep combat options, that is not me saying I wish they'd made it an even more combat-centric game. No, not at all. I'm not wishing for grenades and traps. What I'm saying is that the combat they have created is not interesting enough to sustain the bloated length of the game. It should have been much shorter, and then the combat that's present here would have been suitably entertaining throughout. Instead, we have a much higher emphasis on combat, lasting much longer, without the enemy or attack variety to keep it interesting. The enemies are everywhere, you deal with them all the same way, and they haven't expanded on the original's limited enemy variety either. Actually, they've reduced it because the reappearing abstract daddies don't show up in the hotel anymore. Why not introduce new enemy types based on the metaphors you can draw from the narrative? Were they afraid of adding their own enemies because the fanbase might reject them? Well, then why butcher the character of Maria and remove all the sex from the story? They don't appear worried about that. I don't buy it. I'm not saying the combat is bad. There are good decisions to be made. Shotgun for close encounters, rifle headshots to eliminate the knife-wielding nurses, staggering a mannequin with a few handgun rounds and finishing with melee to save bullets, even targeting an enemy's legs and crossing your fingers for a lucky stumble to set up a devastating melee kill. There's enough here to keep me engaged for something half this game's length and with more enemy variety. Eventually, I just didn't want to do it anymore. And that's what I mean when I talk about the original having better combat pacing. Even though the combat was bad and easy and you had way too many resources, at least you could just get it over with quickly and appreciate the true strengths of the game. Not the case here. Continuing with combat, boss fights are mixed, and that's honestly an improvement because the originals have terrible boss fights. Anything would be better. QTEs and cutscenes would be better than those old fights. It was pretty easy to make a better fight than just running around a square room and dodging attacks until the timer runs out. But since combat is still a pretty limited feature, I can't say I enjoyed many of these new fights either. It's just A and B, dodge and attack. Some bosses have a second and third phase, which is fine. Eddie's fight is definitely the winner in all of this, with a gunfight being far better served by the over-the-shoulder camera than the originals. The abstract daddy fight in Angela's Nightmare is also a pretty entertaining sequence. The AI isn't exactly interesting since you can just infinitely sidestep and wail on him, or at least I was able to once I was out of ammo. But turning him into a series of chase sequences was good for the game's pacing, and it's a good story moment. It makes him feel a lot more horrific than he originally did. The other chase sequence, however, the one with Pyramid Head in the hospital, has sadly been phoned in. The original's chase was uniquely frustrating because of the camera. You couldn't see which way you were supposed to be turning as you ran away from him. Maria would get left behind and die before you made it to the elevator. It sucked. But instead of redesigning the sequence, it's just the same thing again from a camera angle that doesn't screw you. So you just run, and now there's literally nothing to think about. They could have added some interactable objects, or things you can shoot to slow him down. A few enemies in your way to keep you closer to Pyramid Head as he approaches. Anything! Instead, it's nothing. I want to call the Fleshlip fight greatly improved over the original, even though it goes on for too long. But unfortunately, the most challenging aspect of that fight is the controls. Oh boy, here we go. We have some hideous control issues in this game, the most obvious being the insane degree of magnetism on your melee strike, causing you to attack who you don't want, and making you swing at another enemy instead of stepping on a downed one for a crucial kill. Because unlike the original where they tied ground stomp to a different button, now it's on the same button as your regular attack, so the game decides for you who you're gonna attack next. But there are some awful additions for the sake of realism and immersion that make me want to pull my hair out. Every time James picks up an item, he's got to reach out and swipe it with his hand, where in the original you just clicked on it and you got it. The game paused for a moment to say what you got so enemies didn't hit you and you moved on immediately. And you weren't stopping to pick up items during boss fights with your back turned to the enemy. Now, with you having to swipe every time, it means that picking up an item while sprinting will cause him to fully slow down for a few seconds before you can run again. You also have to suffer through long healing and reloading animations where you are unable to pick up items until they finish. Reloading 6 shells into your shotgun while running to safety during a boss fight and you find a life-saving healing item? Tough luck, try coming back later if you lived that long. Isn't this just a grand old time? And did you know that if you press the fire button twice before the first bullet is shot, say in a panic, you'll automatically fire a second shot? Yeah, that's why you're randomly wasting shots. Try it, aim the gun and double tap fire really fast. Watch him shoot twice. This is a buffering issue that I cannot believe made it past playtesting. A firing buffer that punishes consecutive input presses in a game designed to inspire panic. And believe it or not, you cannot buffer a weapon switch with the mouse wheel during a dodge, which is the most important time to be able to do it. If you're on PC, open the game right now. I want you to try dodging and switching to another weapon with the mouse wheel. You can't do it. You have to come to a full stop before the game will even recognize your input. It's fucking infuriating how many times I dodged an attack, I went to pull out my shotgun, and he just didn't take it out. Because I was in the dodge animation, my weapon switch input doesn't count. You might say, well, this is intentional for game balance. But it's not, because you can buffer a weapon switch if you press the corresponding weapon key. This is an oversight that only applies to the cycle weapons option on the mouse. Thank God I eventually figured that out, but half the game had already been ruined because I wasn't using the weapon keys, I was using the mouse wheel. Cause for the first 12 hours I only had 2 weapons anyway. The mouse wheel should be fine for this. Input oversights like this make me fear that enemies randomly tanking through your hit stun is actually just poor programming and not some weird design decision. Interestingly, while you can accidentally buffer a second shot, in a particularly frustrating omission, you cannot buffer a weapon switch while picking up an item. Gotta wait for that slow-ass pickup animation to end before you have the privilege of pressing the weapon switch key. And the icing on top, when you get hit, you cannot buffer a weapon switch. You gotta wait all the way till the recovery animation finishes before you can tell the game you want to be using a different weapon. Compare this to Resident Evil or any other game where the devs understand how input buffers work. This is the wrong kind of combat clunkiness for a survival horror game. There's a big difference between clunky feeling combat and the game straight up ignoring your button presses. I can't even get it to register my inputs when I'm trying to save the game. I gotta be standing in some weird pixel perfect zone. And somehow, every time I want to pick up an item, it's anyone's guess as to whether I'll actually get it. It's not enough to just be, standing in front of it, looking at it. No, that would be way too convenient apparently. There were so many times I thought I picked something up just to run away and realize I left it there. I gotta jiggle around and press the button 20 times. God, this sucks. But the combat isn't just unresponsive and tedious at times, it's also annoying and unfair because, you guessed it, the camera is absolutely terrible. Add Silent Hill 2 Remake to the endless list of games that insist on using this tired, generic, over-the-shoulder camera, while the developers can't even be bothered to make it not zoom into your character model when you back up against a wall, or just apply a transparency effect to the geometry behind you and lock the FOV so the camera doesn't freak out. The only thing that apparently matters to these game studios is making sure the game looks and plays exactly like every other horror game today, not making the camera actually work. Because look at this, does this look like fun to you? One wrong dodge away from a nurse attack and now the camera is 5 miles up my pelvic region. It's disorienting. If you ever press your back up against a wall or get cornered, the camera bizarrely zooms in on you. Is this really okay for people? You seriously prefer to have this issue in all of your horror games? Apparently, because this camera is all over the industry now. Every game has this same issue, and legions of gamers will defend a camera system that bugs out if you don't play perfectly and you dare to get close to a wall. While this game presents its combat with claustrophobic environments, ambushes you with enemies at times, and is actively trying to inspire fear and panic, you're gonna end up against a wall sometimes, and the camera shouldn't be the most terrifying enemy in that situation. The punishment for backing yourself into the corner should be that you're in the corner, that you're vulnerable, that you have fewer options. It shouldn't be that the camera becomes a nightmare too. Instead of demanding more consistent and better designed camera systems, fans will instead insist that it is the player who should be avoiding the camera's issues. They'll say it's your fault for playing badly and ending up against the wall, when the whole point is that the wall shouldn't be doing this in the first place, regardless of how you play. This isn't some rare bug you have to go out of your way to recreate. All you have to do is stand next to a wall, in a game filled with walls! Every camera system has natural limitations. If this were fixed camera, I could turn a corner and walk into an enemy. In over-the-shoulder camera, I can't see enemies behind me. I accept that. But I do not accept that the camera has to zoom into your character model when you're close to geometry. Just make it transparent, lock the FOV, and keep the player at relatively the same distance from the camera. This crap doesn't need to be happening. It didn't need to happen in RE4 Remake, which is why we were able to mod it out and keep the camera at a reasonable distance when you backed into a wall. It doesn't need to be happening in the new God of War games, and it doesn't need to be happening in Sifu, which is the most egregious example in recent memory. Enough with the lazy camera implementation, guys. Raise your standards.
Bro, just don't back into walls.
Shut the fuck up! What are you even doing here?
Bro, I got tacos.
Oh, well, that's nice of you.
Not after you talking to me like that.
I need to be nicer to that guy. I know the original camera was flawed. I never said it was perfect. I have talked about its limitations and frustrating aspects in my video on Silent Hill camera design, but it at least provided some genuinely compelling cinematography that gave the games their own sense of identity. And if we're gonna say this modern standardized camera style is an objective improvement, can we at least make it not screw you every time you back up against a wall in a tight space? And justifying this modern camera angle's problems by comparing it to the camera problems of a game 23 years ago is incredibly disingenuous, when you really should be looking at how that camera style has evolved and improved over time in games that know how to use it correctly. Look at Tormented Souls for an example of how classic survival horror camera styles can without a doubt still work today and minimize their old problems. I refuse to believe for a second that Bloober Team, the guys that made the Medium, wanted to make this game in over-the-shoulder camera. Just like how Konami originally asked for Silent Hill 1 to be made to capitalize on Resident Evil, I'm sure they saw modern Resident Evil's success and mandated that the Silent Hill 2 remake had to play exactly the same. It's really sad. The camera problems of the hospital's claustrophobic combat encounters quickly started souring my enthusiasm for this game. After I was already feeling burnt out by the bloated duration of the levels and the overabundance of puzzles. I don't feel motivated to get better at the combat when half my deaths come from me simply trying to dodge an attack and now I can't see anything because the camera sucks. It makes me want to avoid combat altogether, which, fair, I'll give the game credit for inspiring the important fight-or-flight decision-making of survival horror, but it's for the wrong reasons. You shouldn't be avoiding combat because the game doesn't fucking work half the time. And it's so dangerous to leave these guys alive, because if you end up being forced to eventually fight, another could sneak up on you, and you do not want to be dealing with 2 or 3 of these guys at the same time. And that's fine, groups of enemies are harder to deal with than just one, great. But due to the terrible melee magnetism, the camera flying into your character when you dodge into a wall, and no option to widen the field of view, group combat is, at times, a tedious nightmare. This isn't just about being against the change to over-the-shoulder camera, which I am, because it removes an important part of Silent Hill's identity, the artistic cinematography. The main problem is the execution. Resident Evil 2 Remake has the same camera and it works so much better, because the locations, combat, and movement are designed around making it work. In Silent Hill 2, it just leads to endless frustration and a homogenized experience to boot. Staring at the back of your character's head for 20 hours, yeah, that really makes me sympathize with him. All that being said, I am not immune to the charms of the over-the-shoulder camera. I do love looking around to see the outside of the apartments or the hotel, and some smart direction leads to great jump scares and spooky moments. It's still a beautiful and scary game. There are some genuinely brilliant setups that caught me off guard.
Oh, fuck off!
But even the sense of horror in Silent Hill 2 has been degraded in a way. In addition to the now censored sexually themed imagery, there was this cold, haunting feeling to the original. It wasn't shoving your face into gore. It didn't zoom in on the grotesque. It was kinda understated, which made it get under your skin more. Now we have refrigerators pouring out intestines, lying figures having their iconic smooth look ruined by putting these cringy zippers all over them. And the moment that I happen to think is the most chilling in the original game, hearing Mary call your name in the distance as you turn back down the staircase, has been turned into this obvious moment of her screaming your name. Even the cheesy game show host seems to have been taken from the HD collection's bastardization of him, instead of going with the unnervingly enthusiastic 70s style host of the original.
Welcome to another exciting edition of Trick or Treat! Here you either answer the questions correctly and win a great prize, or fail to answer correctly and receive the punishment!
Welcome to another exciting edition of Trick or Treat, where you answer our questions correctly and win a prize beyond your wildest dreams.
We gotta add these stupid repeated button prompts every time you jump down a hole. Are you sure? Press the action button again if you're sure you want to jump, for the 10th time. We gotta take that one little creepy moment of James reaching into a mysterious hole in the wall and do it over and over and over again, completely diluting the impact. Cause remember when James reached into the hole in the wall? Wasn't that moment cool? Let's do it a whole bunch more. And are you sure you want to reach into this hole? Press the action button again if you're sure. But are you really sure? Press it again if you're really sure. Isn't this scary? What's in the hole? It's not too late to turn back. Press the action button again to make James keep reaching into the hole. Fuck off already. I need to wrap this up. There's not much more I can say. I understand that everyone loves this game. High scores and Game of the Year nominations. Great, I'm happy that people are satisfied. I'm not. It has some great ideas, it looks nice when it's not stuttering on PC, the sound design and music integration are phenomenal, and it's probably an acceptable way to experience Silent Hill 2 if you're determined to never play the original because you aren't open to playing older games or because you don't have access to it. There are apparently even more endings to unlock this time, but I will not be going for them. I don't want to play this again. It's simply too bloated, too sanitized, too repetitive for me to go through another dozen hours. I have no desire to go back and fight the same 3 enemies in an endless loop. I have no desire to revisit these giant maps, even though they had me using my brain to figure them out, which is what I want in a game of this genre. I hate that it makes me feel this way. I don't want to be in extended sequences of dodging and swinging anymore. I don't want to deal with the terrible pickup range on items or the long animations or the lack of input buffering that screws you in life or death moments. I don't want to deal with the dog shit camera. I don't want to be bored by Maria again. I'm just done with it. The first 4 hours really got my hopes up. I'm going to try to just remember that. Oh well, there's always 2025 and whatever horror remake comes out next.